My name is Lori Richer, and I'm going to be your moderator for today's session. So thank you all for coming here. Hopefully the fire alarm woke you up a little bit after that big lunch that we had. So hopefully everyone's feeling a bit refreshed. The first thing that I want to acknowledge is the land that we are on. So the city of Halifax is situated in Mi'kma'ki and the ancestral and traditional lands of the Mi'kmaq people. And for our presentation today, just to make sure that you're all in the right spot, today's session is going to be Federal Action Research on Chronic Homelessness, so otherwise known as the ARH project. And for a little bit of a description today, and if you are in the wrong place, feel free to leave now. But if you are in the right place, what we're going to talk about is to support the Government of Canada's ambitious goal of ending chronic homelessness. Budget 2022 invested $18.1 million beginning in 2022 to 2023, conduct action research into identifying further measures that can support communities in eliminating chronic homelessness. An overview of this initiative will be provided following the participants that we have here today. So we have three different presentations that you're going to hear from today. So we have Jacqueline River from the Action Research on Chronic Homelessness ARCH initiative called Driving Improvements Through Collaborative Action Research. We also have Kaylee, Vanessa, and Victoria that are going to be co-presenting on driving innovation and advancing reconciliation through governmental and Indigenous collaboration. And we don't have Tracy here today, but we have Jackie, and we appreciate Jackie coming today to talk about the ARCH project Action Research on Chronic Homelessness in Edmonton, so embedding R&D in systems change. So hopefully you're all in the right spot. We're going to give each presenter 20 minutes to present, and then there'll be time at the end that we can ask great questions of the presenters that we have here today.
We're almost there.
Maybe while we wait, I'll give a few words too. So thank you, Lori. And in addition, we wanted to give a few words acknowledging where we are traveling from. So for myself, I grew up and I now live once again on the traditional unceded territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe people, as well as the traditional territory of the Haudenosaunee people. And I've been fortunate to be shaped by the beautiful rivers, lakes, and trees where I spent much of my time growing up. I want to acknowledge the histories of these lands and the people who have cared for these territories since time immemorial. Every day, I try to work towards reconciliation in my own life and work, learning from friends, partners, and colleagues, and doing what I can to embed these principles into my work and life. Today, I am deeply honored to introduce ARCH, which we have tried to design in a way that allows us to work a little bit differently with our community partners, and in particular, our Indigenous partners. I am also doubly honored to co-present with two of our ARCH communities, Hamilton and Edmonton. All right, so that's the second presentation. Oh, it's downloading. It's downloading.
Should we tell jokes?
Do you have any?
I like good ones. More appropriate ones. Also, there's a video camera, so I don't want to do that.
All right.
Yeah. Be respectful.
Yeah.
So soon.
Also, thank you all for coming after the fire alarm.
The few, the proud.
Yeah. Wonderful.
Thank you.
Thank you. Very good. Here. Skip a few slides. Can all hear me okay? Yeah? Okay. So, it was important to situate yourselves that ARCH is part of Reaching Home, which if you are unfamiliar with is the federal homelessness program. It replaced the homelessness partnering strategy in 2019 and is part of the National Housing Strategy with a goal to reduce chronic homelessness by 50% by 27-28. It is a community-based program, which is one of its greatest strengths, providing direct support to communities and regions across Canada. Good, okay. Through 4 of our 4 regional streams, so one supporting urban centers, one for the 3 territorial capitals, one focusing specifically on Indigenous homelessness, contributing funding to 30 urban centers and 7 regional areas, as well as a stream for rural and remote communities in each of the provinces. Reaching Home also makes funding available to distinctions-based Indigenous partners through a national stream, and as well as modern treaty holders. The last stream that is not actually mentioned on here is the Community Capacity and Innovation Stream, which is where ARH is funded to help with innovative approaches to addressing homelessness. So to give you a little bit of context of where ARH came from, the Government of Canada committed to eliminating chronic homelessness. However, acknowledging that Reaching Home was never designed to do this, we realized that more needed to be done. So in response to this announcement, we put in a budget proposal which was accepted. Oh, hi. I see many of our ARH partners. I'm very excited that you're all here. And then Budget 22 announced an additional $18 million to conduct action research in a number of communities across Canada, trying to identify what additional measures would be needed to kind of move the needle farther along in communities. So the rationale, Reaching Home, as part of its launch, introduced some minimum requirements in some of the streams, which included enhancing the coordinated approach to homelessness through coordinated access and an outcomes-based approach. However, we also acknowledge that once these minimum requirements have been implemented, there are still a number of barriers faced by communities. So how can we start to try to drill down into these barriers, better understand them, and find ways to overcome them? If I can just, there we go. So like any decent policy, we tried to start with objectives. And what I did in the very beginning was, because I do believe the best solutions come from community partners, I talked to people within our directorate who actually came from communities to get their ideas early on in the process on what they think would be valuable for communities. And that's where the idea of overcoming persistent barriers came from. So for the objectives of ARH, we came up with the following: identify and document persistent barriers. So what are they? How do we better understand them? And test potential approaches to address these barriers while documenting successes and challenges. So the documenting is a really important part of it as well that will be going through the entire process, helping pulling learnings out as we go. And I'll speak a lot more into that a little bit later. A key objective here, so this kind of leads into the next point too, is adapting and sharing the findings as they emerge to enhance approaches to ending chronic homelessness at all levels, so at communities, as well as municipal, provincial, territorial, and federal policies and programs. All right, so we developed a list of guiding principles, which was really to create some consistency across sites in terms of the expectations that we had, as well as to address some of the initial concerns that were brought up internally on the initiative. So these generally include complementing and building on current efforts and governance structures. So we didn't want to interrupt the great work that communities were doing. We wanted to give them the power to build on it. We want to leverage other systems. So I've heard a lot already in the conference and in conferences past about working together with other systems. So that was always an important part of this project as well. We want to embed Indigenous and community-based approaches to the greatest extent possible, again, because I believe that's where the great solutions come from. We also want to involve a wide variety of perspectives and trauma-informed, human-centered, and culturally appropriate approaches. So this slide gives an overview of action research. As the name suggests, the Action Research on Chronic Homelessness Initiative uses an action research approach. And even if you are not familiar with the name, you are probably a bit familiar with the process. So in an action research approach, emphasis is based on incorporating learnings into the project in real time. And that allows the researchers to be able to adapt and adjust their activities and interventions accordingly throughout the course of the entire project. So while there are different approaches to action research, common principles include that iterative cycle of planning, action, evaluation, and reflection, as well as its participatory and collaborative nature. Using this type of approach allows researchers not only to gather data in relation to the research question, but also to problem solve collaboratively, or at least deepen understanding of the barrier that's being studied. So this slide gives a general overview of the research structure. There really should be a few more arrows, so it's a bit simplified. But each project will have a general similar research structure, again, providing some flexibility to communities to adapt as according to their needs. So this slide presents how it was designed, including the roles and the responsibilities of some of the major players. So on the left side of the screen, you see kind of the community level involved in designing and undertaking the research. And that includes the project lead, the advisory table, and the community advisor or developmental evaluator. The project lead is part of the lead organization, and they lead the implementation of the research activities and liaise with all other project team members. The advisory table, building on community governance structures, is selected by the community and guides the project by providing expertise and a variety of perspectives. Our community advisor is basically a developmental evaluator, which is a contracted position that will support each of the projects, so there's one per site, by developing project-specific evaluation frameworks to support the ongoing evaluation and improvement of the project. So the idea is the project lead is really the subject matter expertise, where the community advisor provides some research support in helping evaluate activities as they go and providing suggestions on how to move forward in a collaborative way. The right side shows more of a federal or national layer, where the summative researcher is another contracted position, and they are responsible for the overall analysis of the initiative as a whole, as well as compiling and summarizing findings across sites. So what common themes are coming out, what were some findings that were experienced across sites, challenges, et cetera. The federal support team is basically me and Kaylee. We have a Leia back there too. So members under Reaching Home that provide different levels of support, either through policy, community expertise, Indigenous relations, provincial territorial relations, and program officers. So while the previous slide presented an overall view, this slide shows how we try to incorporate Indigenous perspectives in the various components of the research structure. The project lead, as ARH is a community-wide initiative, there will be collaboration and partnership between individuals, both in Indigenous and non-Indigenous organizations. The advisory table, in addition to this, is required to identify and include additional Indigenous partners as appropriate to support the project design and implementation. The community advisor, through that process, we prioritized candidates with experience conducting research with Indigenous partners and who are informed by Indigenous worldviews. The candidates are also required to complete Indigenous cultural competency training. On the national side, the summative researcher similarly was required to have experience conducting research with Indigenous partners and informed by Indigenous worldviews. And an important aspect of their work will be supporting sites in incorporating Indigenous community-based and or community-driven research approaches into the process. And on the federal support team, we have our Indigenous Relations Unit, who've been just instrumental in helping us develop the initiative with communities in a way that could serve our Indigenous partners the best way it can. So this slide gives an overview of how the sites were selected and how the projects were co-developed with community partners. So, I mean, I have many favorite parts of this process, but I think one of my favorite parts was the initial one where we first engaged. We had a general idea of what we wanted to do, and we had set out some parameters on how we were going to choose the sites. But then we conducted engagement with 23 of our communities across Canada through both streams, as well as PT partners and external stakeholders. But these conversations with communities, the reason it's part of my favorite part is because in addition to collecting some information that would help us evaluate what sites we thought were ready to do this type of work, it also allowed us to discuss with each of these communities what their challenges were, what their priorities were, what they needed, and what they would do if they had this type of opportunity. So that further helped us identify what themes were kind of coming out of these discussions and what these barriers were that seemed to be consistent across a variety of communities. So once we, I don't necessarily like saying selecting the sites because we invited them. This is another piece of work we're asking them to do when it's already, and we know all our community partners are very stretched. So we invited 8 communities to participate. They all accepted, much to our pleasure. And then we started co-developing the projects. So we came with a couple ideas of projects. Most agreed. Some gave us other ideas, which we accepted. And then we launched co-development workshops, bringing in a variety of partners across the communities to talk about the project topic, develop a statement of what they were looking to address and what the outcome, what the desired outcome would be. The communities then worked with our project officers to finalize the applications, and I'm very excited to say we're now in the launch phase. So we are now connecting all of our community partners with their community advisors so they can start building that developmental evaluation framework and basically hit the ground running. So I'm sure this has come through, but I think this is such an important part of the project that it's worth noting on its own, that collaboration is really central to this initiative at all levels, including federal. We're not doing this on our own, we're doing this in collaboration with partners as best we can. At the community level, there is collaboration across funding streams when there's more than one organization delivering Reaching Home funding. When there is not more than one organization delivering Reaching Home funding, we are asking for collaboration with additional Indigenous partners to ensure that voice is included in the design and implementation of the activities. Also, collaboration beyond the sector, which we acknowledge is so important, especially in this time where we're, I feel like we've done a lot of what we can do without going beyond the sector. So depending on the specific project, different orders of government, specific sectors based on the project topic, as well as subject matter experts. A little shout out to Melanie Redmond and Stephen Gates. Okay, so probably what people are actually interested in here are project sites and topics, which we can now finally discuss with everybody. So the projects, they fall loosely into one or more of the main priority areas that we identified following those initial conversations, and understanding there is a lot, again, of matrices, so I've just kind of generally grouped into these categories. But collaboration, so exploring ways to address specific barriers by enhancing collaborative efforts of various stakeholders in and beyond the community. System alignment, acknowledging people often interact with multiple systems. How do we make sure they're speaking to one another more effectively to contribute to that warm handoff between public systems, ensuring no one's falling into homelessness when released from a public system. Data, while important to all of the projects, some will focus more specifically on data systems, including how to use and share the data to better serve specific populations. Enhancing Indigenous supports includes ways to better work together and design supports and services and processes to better serve local Indigenous populations. So, our 8 ARH sites. We have a Whitehorse in Yukon Territory, in Alberta, Edmonton and Medicine Hat, Brandon, Manitoba, in Ontario, Sudbury, London and Hamilton, and Fredericton, New Brunswick. Fredericton / St. John. And here are just some high-level descriptions of the projects. I will say, following the minister's announcement, there was a news released, and there's a backgrounder that has these all listed as well, the communities, and probably a bit of an even higher level description, but they are out there if you want to follow up. Okay, so Whitehorse. Our project in Whitehorse will be led by the Yukon Anti-Poverty Coalition, and they'll be working with the Safe at Home Society, and also wanted to note the important role of the self-governing First Nations in their project, which will be working to strengthen collaboration amongst community partners to create greater alignment and consensus to house the unhoused. Edmonton, so not to scoop you too much, but Homer Trust Edmonton, and I don't have them on here because we're still in conversations, but we've been talking to Red Road Healing Society as well, bringing them into the project. They are investigating ways of reducing unsheltered homelessness by innovating with multidisciplinary outreach teams, seeking to better understand factors contributing to homelessness and using new knowledge to inform policy and program adjustment at the municipal and provincial level. Also, I know I'm reading this, but I don't want to paraphrase this part, so. Okay, Brandon, Manitoba is led by Brandon Neighborhood Renewal Corporation, and they are exploring service navigation and connection hubs in rural areas and investigating the root causes of rural to urban migration in order to better support surrounding communities. And it's important to note here that they are seeking partnerships with the surrounding communities, including developing partnerships with local First Nations, friendship centers in these communities. I put these ones together since it really does speak to both, and these are two Indigenous-led projects. Again, not to scoop Hamilton too much, but the Coalition for Hamilton Indigenous Leadership, with the support of the City of Hamilton, are evaluating the process of building and implementing an Indigenous cultural capacity and accountability framework, an Indigenous data liaison, focusing on the co-development of data and service provision approaches with Indigenous communities. London, led by Atlosa Family Healing Services with the support of the City of London, is investigating alignment between coordinated access and Indigenous housing first by improving coordination, building community support teams, and developing tailored tools, processes, and training to meet the needs of Indigenous communities. And finally, system alignment. So in Medicine Hat, we have the Medicine Hat Community Housing Society and Uwasan Friendship Center, researching ways of better supporting high acuity clients by building stronger connections between healthcare and the organizations who serve these clients, as well as by incorporating Indigenous healing into the westernized healthcare system. Sudbury, we have three partners: the City of Greater Sudbury, the Ontario Federation of Indigenous Friendship Centers, and the, I'm sorry if I mispronounce this, Nswakamuk Native Friendship Center, exploring ways to improve alignment with the child welfare system and outcomes for Indigenous youth through addressing needs such as enhanced supports tailored for youth, improved connections between agencies, and culturally appropriate service delivery. And finally, Fredericton, New Brunswick, the St. John Human Development Council and Turning Leaf Foundation are exploring alignment with the corrections system to prevent discharges into homelessness by improving case management practices for people in corrections, enhancing resources towards Indigenous programming, piloting a systems navigator role to better support clients, and testing early intervention approaches for those at risk of homelessness. So, learnings and next steps. As I mentioned, a really important part of the project will be sharing the findings as they emerge. So we are currently developing a learning plan. We're in the engagement phase. So we will actually be presenting it to our ARH sites tomorrow at the Community of Practice, and getting input from other stakeholders as well on how we can best share the findings as they emerge between the sites, outwards to other communities, to PTs, how we can use it ourselves, and how we can share it with other government departments to make sure we're all working towards the same goal. As mentioned, we are establishing a community of practice as well. We have our initial meeting tomorrow. I think it was originally the 10th, so that is an error now, but we're very excited to launch that, and that is a space where we're bringing together community partners so that they can connect with one another, share challenges and insights, and serve as an additional layer of support for communities. And then I can just skip the next slide. So we're hoping to start sharing learnings as early as winter or spring 2024. And if you have any ideas on how you might like to learn about the ARH project, we are all ears. Thank you. So there's my contact information, Kaylee's, and our community support if you'd like to reach out. No, that's the other one. Is it open? It's not open. She's here, so now she's gone. Okay. Didn't open them all. Sorry, guys. So I don't see, she didn't open them all, I think.
If you don't see it, can we get Jackie to go next?
Okay. We can wait. So I think we'll do a little switch. We're gonna get Jackie to go first because the other one is not on here yet. Don't know what happened. Okay.
Nobody clapped. Hi, okay. So I should preface this that I'm not the original presenter. So unfortunately, Tracy Borelli, who's on our research team, didn't make the flight. So I'm presenting this in her stead. And so if I don't know, miss a dramatic pause or I appear hesitant, just please bear with me. But I'll try to describe the project to you as best as I'm able, considering the information that Jacqueline just gave us. And I think what I'd love for the room to take away from this is just how excited we are to participate and the learnings that we're anticipating from the project. So I think questions are at the end, but if there's anything I say that's really confusing or doesn't make sense, just shout it out at me and we'll just get it sorted out straight away. That's cool. Okay. So land acknowledgement. We try very hard not to read land acknowledgements. I currently work and play in Treaty 6 territory in Edmonton as an immigrant, and as an immigrant to the area. I'm not overly familiar with the Indigenous ways of knowing. I think based on the work that we're doing now and in my prior career in healthcare, I think we see the inequity that are faced by the community, and it's my honor to work in this field and to do what we can to rectify that. So this was a picture of Tracy. This is the only picture I could find quickly. And bad hair day, but you'll just have to bear with me. So I'm Jackie Liu. So I'm the Chief Impact Officer at Homer Trust. Amongst other things, so I get to work with our programs team. So actually in program delivery, I work with our data and analytics team, and as well as our research department. So Tracy Borelli, who's developed these slides and done the majority of the project applications, works with us. And so I'll try to do her and the team justice in going through the information. I won't talk about the ARH project because Jacqueline just did that. But I'd like to say a little bit about Homer Trust. So Homer Trust is the community-based organization or the community entity for the Edmonton area. Just, I guess, in the room, are there other CEs, community agencies? Yeah, there's some frontline providers, I'm sure, researchers, right. So as a community entity, what, amongst other things we do is that we aggregate levels of funding between the federal, provincial, and municipal levels. We work to provide the backbone of coordinated access and the data infrastructure that really coordinates and aligns the system. And we've been doing this work since 2008. I'll talk about Red Road in a little bit, but prior to Red Road joining the I don't know how to say this, the Edmonton landscape, I suppose, in April of this year, we were fortunate as well to be responsible for administering the Indigenous, the federal Indigenous funding as well for the last 5 years. So, we take this responsibility very seriously, and we'll see the scope in a little bit. Tracy's notes are not the way that I speak. It's like she's very proper and like there's longer words and syllables. Okay, so just as an example of the scale of the work. So Edmonton's work in the homeless serving sector is coordinated through one homeless management information system. So we use Efforts to Outcome in Edmonton. Through Efforts to Outcomes and our system, we've got currently 60 coordinated access partners. So that's 60 access points throughout the city of Edmonton where someone experiencing homelessness can access services. We have over 100 different programs, interventions, and support streams for individuals experiencing homelessness. So the rationale is that through coordinated access, you're prioritized the appropriate support stream, and you're able to get what you need as quickly as possible. And it's the no wrong door approach that I think everyone who has coordinated access understands. And as of right now, this is not a good number. Actually, in hindsight, looking at it, it's not great to say that there's 6,000 active individuals on our coordinated access system, but so it is. And that's not 6,000 people experiencing homelessness, but that's 6,000 people who are either on our by name list, are currently being case managed, or supported through our congregate living, supportive living facilities. Oh yeah, I added in a few. These are some of my slides I put in the last second. So I presented this morning, so I just stole some slides and put them over. It's just showing the rapid rate of growth. In 2010, so Edmonton started, Homer Trust started this work in 2009. In 2010, we had 35 programs, and the staff of Homer Trust was about 21 people, and it was a little bit limited. As of today, again, we're over 100 programs. We've had over 16,000 housings since the first housing in 2008. There's 1,800 people that can be supported. So our case capacity at this moment in Edmonton is 1,800 people, and through many collaborations, and I don't see City of Edmonton staff here, but we work very closely with City of Edmonton staff, and currently, or City of Edmonton and its staff, and currently the city has 644 spaces of supportive housing, and those are on all various levels. Some are supported 24/7, some are what we call affiliate sites, so that's where we help people get in with first month's rent, damage deposit, all that kind of stuff. But there's 644 of those sites. So I think we've come a long ways over these few years. Our current system, how did Tracy describe this? Our current system of understanding the state of homelessness involves these pieces. So the by name list, are we all familiar with the by name list? Right. So by name list, people on caseload, the individuals that are enumerated in PIT count, that which we know from the provincial shelter system, and then all the information that's in our data pipeline, all of that forms the state of homelessness. And for us, I think we've heard throughout the day so far that it's not easy, or I don't know if it's possible necessarily, to understand fully everyone who's experiencing homelessness, but through all of these data inputs, we understand it as best as we can. This is the best lens for which we can understand the state of homelessness. Of course, really prevalent right now, both in Edmonton and I suspect where most of you are from, the issue of unsheltered homelessness, visible homelessness, encampments are on the increase, on the rise, or a major concern. You can pick whichever it is. And so the thing that we're very excited for is to utilize the ARH project to really get a greater understanding of what unsheltered homelessness looks like in Edmonton. So a bit of context to that. There we go. These are the numbers of people who are reported and staying in unsheltered places, and this is PIT count data. So starting in 1999, when I was in grade 6, there's numbers as below, and it steadily goes up. Right, and I guess we reached a bit of a peak of individuals that staying unsheltered in 2008, followed by a bit of a decline from the start of the first 10-year plan to end homelessness until present day. So this is the rise and fall, and unfortunately, the rise again of unsheltered homelessness. And this is to show that we're keeping track of these numbers as best we can. Despite some very, very good progress made from the start of the first 10-year plan, we are seeing an increase in unsheltered homelessness once again. How am I doing? I don't know if Tracy's proud of me, but she might be watching. But I guess she can't respond either, right? All right. I think that's the same information again. But from our by name list, sort of the unsheltered individuals staying over time, we're just seeing that gradual increase, and I think that's the experience that's really being shown throughout the country. So I will read this line for a second. So the red line up above, shows the number of people on the by name list that say they're unsheltered, and the green line is sheltered homelessness. So we see that there's a divergence of the provisionally housed versus those who are staying in unsheltered homelessness. And where is this one? I think this is the same theme. I'm sorry, this is where I get a little bit. I wish Tracy was here. To skip it? Cool. I don't know who you are, friend, but I agree with you. The other metric that's maybe relevant to that's relevant to some are the number of complaints, and this is where I think it's important to differentiate the activity of providing paths out of homelessness and housing people who are unsheltered, or housing people who are experiencing homelessness, versus the public perception of it, right? So you'll see that there's a very dramatic increase. These are the numbers of calls to the city of Edmonton. So the city of Edmonton has an encampment response system that's based on our 311 system. Does everyone have a 311 or some equivalent of? It's probably whatever, 411 or something, I'm sure. But these are the complaints. And so the complaints definitely do not equal the number of encampments or the number of people experiencing homelessness, but that rate has tripled, roughly tripled over the period of time. And so, to us, it's the argument, and I think other people at this conference will explain it better than I do. But the perception and the convenience and the perception of homelessness versus the reality, they're both on the rise. One increases obviously precipitously a bit more than others. So the punchline, I suppose, is. We've shown paths out of unsheltered homelessness in the past. Things were going pretty well. If it's working before, why isn't it working now? And that is the. I don't know if it's okay to be excited about the ARH project necessarily, but it's it's about homelessness, right? But it's an exciting opportunity for us to learn actually why were the things that were working before working well, and what can we do better? So we're looking to learn firsthand what is happening. And this is a bit of context, right? I think everyone remembers the pandemic, right? And so there's the broad macro factors of why we think, and this is the academic reason. I guess if you're engaging a friend at a pub or a coffee shop, these would be the broad reasons that you'd say that unsheltered homelessness is increasing. So that's things like COVID restrictions making it illegal for someone to stay provisionally unhoused on your couch, right? That's a change, and that's an erosion of a support system that used to be. We've got a worsening opioid epidemic that's not just the quantity of drugs administered, but also the toxicity, right? So the therapeutic index of the drugs on the street are so much more toxic than before, and the effects are so profound that things are different. Policy changes, affordability, all of those things are factors that increase homelessness as a whole, and those are the really broad strokes. And I think most people, I would imagine all 1,700 people at this conference probably can recite some version of this to any friend that they have. And so the real opportunity is to go beyond that and actually talk to people, talk to people on the front line, talk to people on the streets, our clientele, to really get not just the superficial level, but to get underneath and say, hey, what is it that puts you in this situation, and what can we possibly do to improve the situation for you? So, I did that pretty good. This is the, and I'm sorry, I couldn't see Jacqueline's slides from where I was sitting, but the cycle of continuous improvement will be action-based, right? So we'll have a program innovation, we'll work it out with our stakeholder group, we'll test it out, we'll see kind of how it goes. Tracy, this is where Tracy told us really well. We're going to utilize as best as possible the power of storytelling. So actually utilizing lived and living experience, our frontline colleagues, to really understand just beyond check boxes and checklists and ETO touch points or case management notes or whatever you call them, right? Beyond all of those things, how can we actually influence someone's experience through homelessness? And so by engaging with research participants, our advisory table, and then in our program design, we've incorporated 6 programs. Some of them are sitting in this room and they've not been told about this yet, but this is how we're going to hope to learn. This is how we're going to hope to derive action items for us to test in a PDSA cycle and to gradually try, test, adjust, evaluate, and do it again. Are we cool? What's happening?
Sorry, are we just starting now?
I don't know. I got Chuck Norris over here on my right. Are we cool? All right. Where was I? Of the ARH advisory table, this is the part that I think we're most excited about. So Homer Trust makes a very concerted effort to engage with the community. So we've been the community entity since 2008, and again up until this April, we were also administering the federal Indigenous funds. And so our structure, our permission to play structure, is based very heavily on our CAB committees. So that's our Indigenous Advisory Council, our Project Planning Committee, and our Lived Experience groups. So we're looking forward to working with all those groups to inform the project. We've been joined in Edmonton by the Redwood Healing Society, which I don't see them in the room, but they're at the conference, and we're looking forward to connecting with them. They've assumed the contracts that Homer Trust started a few years ago with some Housing First teams funded by Indigenous agencies, and we're really looking forward to having their insights inform the project and and design some of these action interventions that we can test out. And so. Throughout this group, this is the process this is the process that our research team will take over the next few months. For us, just to, I guess, give you an idea of how our expectations of the research team will work is we'll do a full literature review. There's been a ton of research, some very good research done in Edmonton on encampments and unsheltered homelessness. There's a MAPS group that did outstanding work in ORCODE as well that tried to describe why do people sleep outdoors, and those are where some of the rationale and some of the knowledge that many of us take for granted now. So things like shelter privacy, the availability of spaces for animals, the suitability of couples and partners in shelters, like those factors are now relatively well known in Edmonton, and so we'd like to build on the good work that people have done before. So to build on a very strong foundation, looking at whether those barriers are in fact real barriers, and if there's other barriers that we can add on top of that, and really taking those barriers, testing them out where we can, and allocating resources and and working with our community to learn from those. So. I think that's. Sorry, I'm not done yet. I'm not done. Sorry. I'm sorry, Tracy. Okay, and then this is the cycle of ARH, which I won't repeat this, but these are the teams that we're hoping to work with. So as part of the ARH project design, we have in our proposal 6 distinct teams spaced throughout Edmonton. So within the spectrum of homeless serving services at Edmonton, we have services that range all the way from outreach. We have I guess street outreach and sort of housing directed outreach and various intensities of intensive case management and housing teams, all the way to congregate medically supportive housing sites. So looking to take a cross section of that knowledge so that we can learn, and then these will be our I guess they're our intervention group. And then I guess we have a pretty good control group for the rest of it. So working with these teams, again, through the cycle of innovation to design an intervention, to test it out, to test the feasibility, the reproducibility, and for us to learn. And hopefully at the end of this, the thing that we're very excited is we should be able to identify on a local landscape what are the reasons that encampments are coming up and what are the best tactics for us to address those. And I think I'm going to wrap it here because I've done the best I can. And this is Tracy's contact info if you'd like to get what she was actually going to say. So thank you very much.
I think she might be in the downloads.
So who does?
Oh, here. It's okay.
It was there.
It was in the downloads. I just thought it'd be open, but then I remembered it was downloaded, so I think we're good. Thank you.
Did you get it?
Yeah. That's why my big brain was like, it's in the
Okay.
downloads.
Hello. Are we able to hear me? Incredible.
Hi everyone, my name is Kaylee Brady. I have she, her pronouns, and I'm excited and honored to be here in Mi'kma'ki on the unceded land of the Mi'kmaq people. And I want to also acknowledge the traditional land that I come from. Thank you. We're having flashbacks to Whitehorse. This is, I'm a very soft speaker. Okay, we can hear me now? Great, I'll also try to enunciate. But I also want to acknowledge and honor the traditional lands that I come from in Revelstoke, BC, the Sinaiks, the Tanaha, the Secwepemc, and the Silks. And so it's an honor to share this space with all of you today to discuss ARH. As Jacqueline mentioned and highlighted, Indigenous partners have been engaged throughout the ARH process, but what I'm going to walk through today is how we work to build strong partnerships with Indigenous peoples, communities, organizations through the collaboration and co-development processes, and what we've learned along the way from the federal government perspective. Spoiler alert, we didn't get everything right. We've had to make adjustments to our processes, particularly when engaging with Indigenous partners. What I'm hoping you take away from the presentation today is co-development and collaboration with Indigenous partners is not only possible, but it builds strong partnerships and ultimately stronger projects. I'll then pass it over to my co-presenters, Vanessa and Victoria, to further discuss how the approach played out through the development of Hamilton's project. Good, okay. So Jacqueline gave a really good overview of Reaching Home and the ARH initiative, but why was collaboration with Indigenous partners so critical to the ARH project? So listening to feedback that we received from Indigenous partners and recognizing that the overrepresentation of Indigenous peoples experiencing homelessness is attributable to the ongoing and systemic colonization and displacement, it was important we took this opportunity to explore a different way of working with partners. From the beginning, ARH was to be a community-wide initiative working with projects were expected to work across Reaching Home funding streams, meaning in communities that had a both designated community and Indigenous homelessness community entity were expected to work together from the earliest stages of the project. And if there was no Indigenous homelessness stream present, we went beyond Reaching Home partners and engaged with Indigenous organizations from the community. Each phase of the process was designed to leverage the strengths and honor the knowledge of Indigenous partners and communities, and this was important to ensure that findings could be applied to communities all across Canada. But it's important to note we continued to learn from our partners, meaning that we had to update, adapt, and adjust our processes as ARH progressed to reflect the learnings. We like to say that we did an action research project within an action research project. So what do we mean by collaboration and co-development? What did that actually look like in practice? I'll provide some examples of how we implemented this in the later slides, and I won't read these attributes specifically. What we aimed to do was, community-wide collaboration, making sure all participants knew that participation was voluntary, creating a safe space for partners to discuss ARH, and this meant being flexible and understanding that there'd be different priorities and approaches at each meeting. And participation with equal opportunity to influence the process and outcomes and a joint ownership of the projects. So we had to acknowledge and honor the history and context that we brought to conversations as the federal government, particularly with Indigenous partners. And we're also a funder, so there's an inherent power dynamic that we bring to these discussions. I'll speak to later, communities were able to push back on some of the processes, on timelines and criteria, to ensure that Indigenous partners were meaningfully engaged and that there was joint ownership between Indigenous and non-Indigenous organizations. Another key attribute I'll highlight is nurturing relationships and acceptance of the co-development process. Building relationships takes time. As Jacqueline mentioned, we started this site selection process in summer 2022, and we're now launching projects well into fall 2023. This process can't be rushed, but what makes it possible was everyone's commitment to the co-development process. So site selection. As Jacqueline mentioned, a site selection process was developed to ensure ARH sites were selected according to objective criteria that aligned with research aims, including if communities had existing partnerships with Indigenous organizations, and then the strength of those partnerships. To ensure ARH communities had a strong potential for Indigenous and non-Indigenous collaboration, we engaged key stakeholders, including national homelessness organizations and program officers who work directly in the communities to leverage their knowledge and expertise. At this stage, we were only seeking to raise substantial issues that needed to be discussed with communities directly, because following that engagement with key stakeholders, we plan to engage all partners of shortlisted communities, as Jacqueline mentioned, and we held separate meetings for the designated community entity and the Indigenous homelessness community entity, and if applicable, the Indigenous partner in the community. This created a space for partners to share their own community priorities, challenges, and provide more detail or context on their ability to collaboratively work together on the ARH initiative. The strength of the existing partnership between Indigenous and non-Indigenous partners was a key consideration in our final recommendation of communities. So So what did we learn? As simple as it sounds, collaboration with Indigenous organizations is essential and has to be done from the initial part of any project. In the initial design phase of ARH, some of the very first decisions that we made before engagement was deciding to set up the initiative to study more advanced communities, and that did preclude some Indigenous homelessness community entities from participating in ARH. Additionally, when we engaged with national homelessness organizations, we didn't engage with the National Indigenous Homelessness Council, so NIHC, and that was a big gap in our process. Earlier engagement with NIHC and Indigenous partners more broadly would have helped inform processes for engaging with communities, identified issues with timelines we were proposing that then got raised later in discussions, and also help build Indigenous knowledge principles into all other aspects of ARCH. That being said, moving forward, we're actively working to apply that action research framework and learning methodology. So we've been engaging with the NIHC coordinator regularly in the development phase of various aspects of the initiative, as Jacqueline mentioned, in the learning plan, in the advisory tables, and the community of practice, to ensure they have an opportunity to discuss how things move forward. So in the second phase, so the co-design phase, as Jacqueline mentioned, we held initial meetings and co-development workshops. At this stage in the process, we recommended the communities we believed were best positioned to participate in the ARCH project, but as Jacqueline mentioned, no one had agreed to participate in the initiative, and this was important. I'll come back to it a little bit later. We held initial meetings with recommended communities to discuss timelines, research topics, capacity, interest of how each would like to be involved. And each community entity Indigenous partner was given the option of having meetings either together or separately, but every community decided to have joint meetings, signaling strong relationships between Indigenous and non-Indigenous partners. Since there was only going to be one agreement holder in this initial meeting space, communities had to determine how they wanted to work together and who was to lead the project. And why I mention this process is because we have two projects led by Indigenous organizations, and then we have three that have a specific focus or lens on Indigenous individuals or communities experiencing homelessness. So this collaborative nature continued into the co-development workshops, where we brought in a broader range of stakeholders to discuss the problem to be addressed and interventions to be studied. The goal was to create a space where everyone felt that it was safe to share their perspectives and collaboratively build their projects. And a key part of that was inviting elders from the community to each meeting to open and close the meetings in a good way. This set the stage and tone for communities to continue to co-develop their applications. So again, what did we learn? We need to be flexible in our internal processes and receptive to ongoing feedback from communities. For example, communities had not agreed to participate in the initiative when we had those initial meetings, and communities did push back and were very adamant about needing additional time in order to meaningfully engage with Indigenous partners, including with modern treaty holders, if they were going to participate in this project. And we were able to extend the timelines, and I think this is a good example of how there was equal opportunity to influence the process. Another example is when we initially contracted out the evaluators, so the community advisors or the developmental evaluators. The hope was that was going to alleviate capacity concerns in the communities that we'd heard during the site selection process. But what we found, rightfully so, when we went back to communities, is there were concerns about if these evaluators were going to have experience working with Indigenous communities, understand, Indigenous research methodologies were maybe a little bit different, and how that was going to be applied. And so communities asked if they could review our evaluation criteria for getting those evaluators out, and this isn't a typical process that we follow, but we asked. And the great thing about asking is just because something's been done one way for a long time doesn't mean that's how it has to continue. And the procurement folks on our side didn't have an issue, so we were able to share the criteria for the evaluators with communities. And this was really important because it provided invaluable insights to ensure these positions included Indigenous learnings, ways of knowing, and worldviews, and to also argue it built a sense of trust and pulled back a little bit at the veil of what goes on the government side in these processes. There also need to be a balance of a clear overall vision of the project, as well as having the flexibility to have real community-driven projects. So in our initial meetings, communities came with ideas of research topics that they wanted to study, and then we aligned that with sort of our overall objectives. We needed to make sure that we created a space where everyone could discuss what objectives or projects wanted to be studied. We also need to balance streamlining and tailoring content. For example, we kept the co-development workshops all the same. However, when we looked back, it could have been beneficial if we had tailored it to where people were in the co-development process. And we've internally learned we need to have clear and defined processes to ensure there's proper protocols in place to invite and provide honorariums for elders. Do we really need 7 forms signed by 7 different people in order to get this done? And again, applying an action research methodology and learning from the processes, we're trying to do better moving forward. So all that being said, while flexibility is important, so is transparency, because we have to be honest, not everything was possible. So being clear around timelines and expectations, including being honest about what the limits of the flexibility was, made sure everyone was working with the same information and built strong relationships and trust with communities. I also know it's the first bullet on the screen, but I saved it for last because I think it's one of my key learnings. But providing a safe and constructive environment by engaging honestly with humility and empathy can allow for plans to be more inclusive and representative of voices at the table. To ask when you don't know, admit when you are not right, apologize and learn, the key word being learn, you create the space for others to do the same. So recognizing I'm running out of time, and I'm going to pass it over to my colleagues, but some outcomes and impacts that we had. We've improved internal ways of knowing and learning between the federal government and Indigenous communities. As we discussed, being flexible and receptive to shifting directions and timelines, we've been able to build relationships with our communities and Indigenous partners that are based on trust and transparency. The collaborative nature of ARH has shown there's a different way possible to develop projects, and it's resulted in projects that are truly community-driven, and with shared ownership between Indigenous and non-Indigenous organizations. As I've highlighted, it does take time. It can be messy. We constantly joke that we were building the plane while we were flying it. But with humility and a commitment to the learning process, not only is co-development possible, but it does build stronger partnerships, ultimately creating stronger projects. I'm excited to see where these projects will go and to continue to learn from our brilliant partners. And with that, I'll pass it over to Vanessa and Victoria, who will speak to how this approach played out in the Hamilton context.
Can everyone hear us okay?
Okay, great. So I'm Vanessa Parlett from City of Hamilton.
Sego Sawagwego, Victoria Bomber, ni Youngyats, Ganya Yahaga, ni Wakonjo, the Waxkare, Wagani Wagitro, and the 6 Nations in Nidwagenu. I am the Indigenous, my name is Victoria Bomberry, and I am the Indigenous Data and Policy Analyst for the Coalition of Hamilton Indigenous Leadership. I'm also the co-chair of the National Indigenous Homelessness Council. Actually, Vanessa, before we move on from this slide, I wanted to draw attention to the quote on the screen here. We chose it very intentionally. In some of our earlier conversations about how we were going to prioritize Indigenous peoples in Hamilton's homelessness system, this comment arose. And I think it highlights some of the challenging conversations we have as community entities. And I'm sure it reflects some of the situations you're in. We have a certain amount of resources to address and prevent homelessness, and this comment arose. And it gave us a moment to really reflect on why we had committed to prioritizing Indigenous peoples in Hamilton's homelessness system and how we were going to do it in a way that reflected the City of Hamilton's commitment to reconciliation and also was accountable and responsive to the entire City of Hamilton. And so our presentation is sharing that journey about how we approach and do this work in Hamilton, and we hope it offers some starting points to other municipalities as well.
And that fits into our overall recognition driving this work is that Indigenous homelessness is a colonial legacy. So this underpins all of the work that we do in Hamilton as a homeless serving sector, as well as the deep relationship between City of Hamilton and Coalition of Hamilton's Indigenous Leadership. So the land that I'm fortunate to live and work upon in Hamilton is on the traditional territories of the Erie Neutral, Huron-Wendat, Haudenosaunee, and Mississaugas. It's very important to recognize the space and the stewards of the land and resources that have come before us. Of course, we know that this territory continues to be home to Indigenous people from across Turtle Island, and it's also, most importantly, a call to action for all of us to recognize the colonial violence that has led to the displacement, dispossession, and disempowerment of Indigenous people in our communities. In Hamilton, we really follow the Indigenous definition of homelessness put forward by Jesse Thistle in recognition that Indigenous homelessness is not solely a loss of home, it's also disconnection from community and culture. The disproportionate rates of Indigenous homelessness that we see in Hamilton and across Canada are directly tied to government action and policy that have led to disadvantage in relation to housing, labor, and all kinds of social disadvantage. And so as a city and any level of government, it's incumbent upon us to take this action seriously, to redress those ongoing harms, and move forward in building more equitable systems overall in our partnership together.
So some background information, how we got here to be an ARH-supported project. The Coalition of Hamilton Indigenous Leadership is the Indigenous community entity for Reaching Home in Hamilton. We're also the agreement holders of ARH funding in Hamilton. Many of you may know that Cindy Sue, Montana McCormick, and I have led this work in Hamilton for many years, but what you may not know is that the Coalition of Hamilton Indigenous Leadership, CHIL, just recently became the Indigenous community entity in Hamilton in 2020. Prior to that, it was held by a non-Indigenous agency, the Social Planning and Research Council of Hamilton, with support of the Aboriginal Community Advisory Board for them to hold and steward that portfolio with a commitment that it would be staffed by Indigenous peoples, like myself and Cindy Sue, and that eventually it would be passed on to an Indigenous-led organization, which is now CHIL. I share this brief history about the Indigenous community entity role in Hamilton to draw attention to our capacity as a community organization. We call ourselves small but mighty. We have 5 full-time staff and 2 part-time staff who are also students. CHIL, as an Indigenous community entity, has separate funding agreements, separate reporting requirements. As the community entity, we also have a separate Indigenous Community Advisory Board that supports us as well. Ultimately, CHIL is responsible to the Indigenous community of Hamilton and its funders for how we steward investments in addressing Indigenous homelessness in Hamilton. I will dive into the details in a few slides, but our partnership with the City of Hamilton has been integral for CHIL and Indigenous community in Hamilton to build up and sustain capacity to lead this work.
Thanks, Victoria. And so as community entity, I know Jackie went over the roles through Homeward Trust. It means that through City of Hamilton, we're accountable to all federal, provincial, and municipal strategies for ending and preventing homelessness. It also includes management and development of our coordinated access system, again in deep collaboration with CHIL, rolling out the by name list and HIFA systems, as well as ensuring a comprehensive continuum of supports aligned with Housing First for ending homelessness. In the way that we do this work together, it's also very important to account for this disproportionate resources between our agencies. So as the city, we're very fortunate to draw on the broader structures of HR, legal, communications. We have an Indigenous relations team at the City of Hamilton with an ongoing strategy as well. And so that all helps us carry some of the weight and make sure that we're supporting our partners with the give and take capacity. And so embarking on ARH together is a really critical way of addressing some of those inequities that, again, are driven through colonial violence imposed on Indigenous communities. That means that for local ARH projects to work, that they must be built on a foundation of trusting relationships and reciprocity. We're going to talk at greater length about the relationship between CHIL and the city, but also want to acknowledge the role of the federal government and the accommodations and partnership that they've brought forward through ARH. From the outset, they've been really invested in making sure communities have the space to define and lead based on local priorities, local capacity, and allowing us to build on that shared collective knowledge and approach through the federal partnership, engaging in national knowledge sharing, and then of course the project funding that comes along with it always helps as well. One of the examples that Kaylee showed was the accommodation around timelines. At first, communities were hearing about the opportunity in January of 2023 with the plan to co-design February, March, and launch in April. And so heard very strongly from the Indigenous community that's not going to allow enough time to engage with Indigenous community members and beyond the capacity limitations, so very flexible to adjust that do our co-design later in May, and then refine the application and the structure of the project over the summer. And so locally, our ARH project is made possible through the ongoing and long-standing partnership between the City of Hamilton and Chill. This is a very long history of dedicated relationship building by members of our teams, past and present, who have laid the work for this partnership that we have ongoing. And we are both here very honored to continue building forward in this work. The roots of this relationship are often traced back to 2004. So at this time, Chill, which was formerly known as Headache, Hamilton Executive Directors Aboriginal Coalition.
That was intentional. There's a story behind that vote.
Yeah, maybe in your questions you'll get to that one. The Hamilton Community Advisory Board and the city came together and decided that 20% of all federal homelessness program dollars would be invested through the Indigenous community. And then since 2009, that process and adjudication has been Indigenous-led as well.
Mm-hmm. So these are some of the highlights to share our relationship with the city, and it's because of the City of Hamilton's investment in Chill and Indigenous leadership in Hamilton that we've built up and sustained the capacity to work alongside the city and take a top-down approach to our ARH initiative. Our relationship with the City of Hamilton is as funder to funder. We share decision-making on how to direct and invest in our homelessness serving system. Since year one of Reaching Home, we have collaborated with the City of Hamilton on how to design and implement the coordinated access system for our community in ways that reflect the needs of Indigenous peoples and prioritize Indigenous peoples throughout. In operation, this shared leadership looks like Indigenous leadership and representation at every City of Hamilton homelessness table, internal and external. We have ongoing communication and relationship building between our staff teams and routinely have those hard conversations like I highlighted at the beginning of our presentation to help us understand where we can do better and where we must do better to help our community. ARH is also helping us to accelerate our approach to homelessness data. The City of Hamilton has long recognized that Indigenous-led data initiatives result in better data, more meaningful data that can help address and identify needs in our community. Previously, we've practiced this through the point-in-time count. And Chill, Indigenous leadership, we have led those initiatives for Indigenous peoples to help ensure that Indigenous peoples experiencing homelessness are engaged in ways that are culturally appropriate, most typically by Indigenous staff and volunteers, and that the data collected about Indigenous peoples is gathered by, held by, controlled by, and analyzed and shared by Indigenous leadership. This funder-to-funder relationship and recognition of our shared responsibilities is the foundation of our ARH initiative.
So why ARH? We're going to talk very briefly about why we need the ARH project that we're building collaboratively in Hamilton. And so although our homeless serving sector in Hamilton is deeply committed to truth and reconciliation through building the processes that we're developing together and being inclusive and culturally sensitive, we know that the current system is not designed adequately to address the cultural needs, preferences, and ways of knowing and being of Indigenous peoples. And this leads to disparities in service access, experiences, and outcomes. We know particularly that common triage and assessment tools are not well suited for Indigenous community members.
We recognize the need to strengthen cultural capacity and training within our system within non-Indigenous homeless serving agencies to ensure that staff at every homeless serving agency is appropriately trained and supported to ask the right questions and offer the appropriate supports for Indigenous peoples experiencing homelessness. By building trust and capacity throughout our system will enable stronger and better data about Indigenous homelessness. And through Indigenous-led governance and stewardship of Indigenous data, we'll improve our understanding of Indigenous homelessness, which will help our system to be more reflective and responsive to the needs of our community. Our ARH project focuses, I think it's the next slide. So this will speak very briefly about the actual ARH project, what we're doing in Hamilton, and we're doing a system-wide review and taking a community approach to addressing homelessness and improving our system. The overarching idea, solution we've drafted is an Indigenous cultural capacity and accountability framework, and two of the key outcomes of our project are a common assessment tool specifically designed for Indigenous peoples with Indigenous cultural leaders, cultural knowledge keepers, that'll be a part of a whole response to identifying the strengths, experiences, and needs of Indigenous peoples experiencing homelessness. The second key component of our ARH initiative is looking at Indigenous data governance and stewardship, again, to strengthen the way that Indigenous data is gathered, controlled, analyzed, and shared in our community. This framework will support our community in better identifying and resolving gaps and challenges within our coordinated access system that prevent effective service and support of Indigenous peoples experiencing homelessness.
Do we have a minute or?
A minute? We'll do a minute.
Oh. So just very quickly, project outcomes and impacts. So of course, want to see improved experience for Indigenous peoples accessing our system. Just want to quickly note how important this is to be driven by the city through our non-Indigenous homeless serving agencies to make sure that this is an approach that we're all accountable to through this system that we're building. We know how committed people are to doing this work, but often frontline staff don't know where to start. So this project will help give some of the capacity, the confidence, and the processes to support people in doing so.
Yep, and very quickly, we envision a better understanding about Indigenous homelessness across our system. We envision being able to appropriately invest and direct our system to respond to the needs of Indigenous peoples. And ultimately, we envision Indigenous peoples are housed in our community and appropriately housed to stay housed, supported to stay housed.
Thank you, Lori, for
Thanks, everyone. And just another round of applause for Jacqueline, Jackie, Kaylee, Vanessa, and Victoria. And then I also want to thank the room for putting up with the tech challenges. So thank you, everyone. I really appreciate that. We have about 15 minutes before the reception starts. And so if there are any questions for these amazing individuals, please, let me know if you've got a question. And I think we've got a mic. We're going to test and see if it works. Anybody have any questions? All right, let's try it out.
I can just yell from here. I'm happy with that.
We're going to try to make sure that the people that are going to watch this later.
I am loud. Okay, can you hear me? Can you hear me now? Do you guys have a time?
Put them on.
maybe they have a question.
For this new project, do you have a time frame of we want this amount of information by year 2, year 4, or how long does this project go for?
Is that for Hamilton?
No, across Canada.
So
Or is each project different?
Well, they vary a little bit because the launch times are a bit staggered depending on how long the co-development of the applications took. So the original idea was 2-year projects. We weren't able to extend the end dates, though it is something we're exploring. So right now, the community projects will finish March 2025, and then we have an additional year with a summative researcher to help pull out those common themes. So there's going to be interim reports developed by our developmental evaluators throughout. So we'll actually get monthly notes from them, looking at emergent learnings and anything about the process. And then every few months, it'll be a little bit more detailed and involve, the notes will include collaboration with the project leads, so from both organizations. And then every few months, it will be a bit of a broader engagement, including like additional partners in the advisory table. And then more formal reports, so at the beginning, the middle, and the end. So we can basically see how things have changed, because it's really about evaluating processes. So we framed it as there's no failure, there's no, people ask us how we define success, but it's really about learning. So if we can learn more about the issue, then that is success to us. So we'll be sharing findings related to that.
Thank you for that. Anyone else have a question? Yep.
Sorry, English is my third language, so if I can't deliver a politically correct term, my apologies. So it's not a direct question, but my observation in terms of the homelessness, the new trend of homelessness that I'm seeing, because I'm from Toronto, and I work in many different shelters. Now I'm seeing a newcomers in the shelter, which was quite a shocking for me. People moved to this country to fix their life, and how they ended up in a shelter. That's my thinking. Is there any way in a federal level, throughout the pipeline, kind of research on those particular section, less visible minorities? Because I've seen a newcomer family, their kids in a shelter, I was like, why is this happening? So will there be any kind of program, research in the future that may look into those kind of the people that invisibly marginalized, but they can't come up? Thank you.
That's a great question, and I wish I had my data expert, Annie Duchesne, here, because there's no ARH project focusing specifically on newcomer populations, but we do have data through some of our other systems, including HIFIS and the PIC counts, on newcomer homelessness, and I know that they're, I think, maybe publishing something soon or working on some products about that. So yeah, ARH is one piece of the puzzle, but we do have other things on the go looking more specifically at that.
Anybody else have a question? Yep.
So I think one of my biggest questions with this ARH research, I'm not known for my tact, so forgive me. At the end of all of this research, I hear a lot about agency accountability, but the one theme that I don't hear as much about is government mandated service accountability. I've been a frontline homelessness worker for 5 or 6 years of my career. I've walked in the youth world, and I've also walked in the adult world. There's a massive lack of accountability for services like CFS, for CLDS, which is Community Living Disability Services, Children's Disability Services. There's no accountability for these services that aren't following through on what they're mandated to do. So at the end of all of this research, is this going to potentially lead to accountability being put on these government services?
I think that's a great question and also great input. See, we were always looking for input from community members because as we are building the developmental frameworks, it will be, as I think we made clear, collaboration is such an important part. So I think incorporating that layer of accountability, especially when working with other systems, is really important, especially across government. So part of our work is working with other government departments as well on how they can improve their programs and policies in consideration of the homeless population, making it kind of a required consideration in their policies, where right now it isn't in many cases, although we know that it's failures in a variety of public systems that result in homelessness. So that is kind of the work that we're doing. The accountability piece specifically, I don't have a clear answer, but I think it's needed, absolutely, and we'll work on how to incorporate that and how we can build that accountability across systems and across government departments.
Accountability and collaboration.
Any other questions? Yep.
Hi, Emily Parody from the Office of the Federal Housing Advocate. So speaking of accountability, and just not to put too fine a point on it, but I think that the particular systems that were being identified are in provincial territorial jurisdiction. And of course, our office is facing some challenges in terms of implementing the human right to adequate housing, which has been implemented and established in domestic legislation that is mainly pointed right now at the federal government, but recognizing that many of the key issues and root causes of homelessness are within provincial territorial jurisdiction. So I am curious, given that reaching home involves federal municipal partnerships, how will provinces and territories be kind of brought into these processes so that those accountability structures get built? And what are some of the levers that infrastructure is considering implementing in terms of conditionalities around housing and homelessness funding and infrastructure funding to ensure that provinces and territories uphold their human rights obligations?
Thank you. That's another excellent question. Again, I don't know if I could give a clear answer fully. In terms of conditionalities, it goes beyond ARH, but I know it is something that's a topic of discussion, I'll say. But I think you've really nailed it, because reaching home, one of the great things is that it works directly with communities, so it does kind of bypass that layer a bit. We have attempted to bring in provinces and territories to all the ARH projects. We couldn't get all of them fully on board. But we do have collaboration from a lot of them, including Alberta providing funding for the Medicine Hat project and connecting with the healthcare system. So I do see a lot of hope there. And I think again, Kaylee mentioned, and we probably say it every second day, that we're doing an action research project on action researched. So us working with the provinces and territories through these projects is another way for us to figure out how to do that. We'll have more luck than others, like in some places rather than others, but definitely we do have different levers. We have a housing and homelessness forum with the provinces and territories. We are going to be, I think, presenting on ARH at some time soon. Obviously, we've already brought in the provinces and territories that are associated with the communities that have been selected, but it'll go a little bit broader. And then that will be, there is a lot of interest in it and what we learn and what we find. And so, yeah, again, a work in progress, but it's on our radar, and understand it's a really, really important piece of the puzzle, because, yes, those system alignment pieces are provincial jurisdiction. So we only have so much power, so that's kind of one of the pieces that with the current division of powers, how can we work better with them to make sure that the systems are talking better to each other, and so that we can all work together towards this goal of properly addressing chronic homelessness and all homelessness. Thanks.
Thank you. Any other questions at all? Yep.
Thanks. So my name is Christina Craig. I'm with the Yukon Anti-Poverty Coalition, and we just got the news that we're a go.
Like yesterday.
So great. And we're very happy about that. And I'm just curious about sort of this conversation, because one of our piece really that we are hoping to work on is collaboration between and amongst governments that's being led by a community organization where we are not at all the tables. And so it's an interesting, if we're looking at persistent barriers, I could probably stick up my hand right now and say that is one of the findings that we can talk till we're blue in the face about collaborating on potentially on coordinated access, or how we're working with the by name list, or how we're trying to come up with ensuring that data is held where it needs to be held. Like, they're huge, huge issues. So I don't know what my question is exactly, but I do really appreciate this Emily's comment about these various levels and accountability, and the fact that we are going to be putting an awful lot of time and energy into doing this action-based research, and somehow that when you're not one of those governments, and we have and in the Yukon we have self-governing First Nations, so they are one of those governments, and they are not seen as equals within yet. They're new, 30 years new, but so what is my question? I guess we're excited, but it's all of a sudden feeling very daunting. And trying to figure out how can we be a part of that PDSA cycle that you are speaking about, that you're learning as we're learning. And is that gonna, maybe that's my question, is that through the summative researcher? Is that through our community? Like, how is that connection gonna get made? So that we're not sort of doing our thing and it's not actually moving where it needs to move.
I think that will be the role of the community advisor / developmental evaluator, because we're actually quite happy. We've now connected with all the developmental evaluators, and we think we have some really good people, so we're happy. And I think they will help provide that structure and guidance. So you know, the communities, you will be the one leading the charge. You have the knowledge, the connections, the goal, but they can help through their understanding of the research process in like guiding you how to get there. So that will be their responsibility. But just speaking to some of the things that you said earlier on, part of the reason we thought it was so important for us to design the initiative rather than fund another organization to do it is that federal leadership piece that, you know, well, obviously in response to my last question, it doesn't always work either, but we have that role of trying to bring people to the table as well. So we're also there to serve that role the best that we can. So while the community advisor really is going to be your like day-to-day point person and helping you advance the projects, like we are also always available to support the projects. And I've also often described the White Horse Project as the most like it's on collaboration, right? Where a lot of other projects are using collaboration, yours is really on collaboration because of the environment in Whitehorse, and I think that is super, super valuable as well. In this context, how do you work across all these varieties of partners at various levels to come together, right? Like that in itself, that is a really valuable project, and the lessons learned from that will be very valuable as well. And like acknowledging that no project will be able to be picked up and moved to another community. Like there will be thoughts on how to scale that across communities and how to present the learnings in ways that are adaptable that other communities can draw from.
Okay. Yeah. I think the like our excitement with ARH project and the resources will be to leverage the relationships that we have as a community-based organization. Like we're in the midst of our community plan renewal, and one of the really priorities is to take away the idea that the community-based organization or we could extrapolate to any one branch of the system needs to solve homelessness. So in 2010 or 2008, you could say that if an agency or if a level of government did this, then the problem would be resolved. And with the evolution of what's happened over the last few years, I think we've learned very much that's not the case. And so, you know, speaking for, I guess from our organization, if throughout this ARCH research that we're able to identify, for example, a very tangible gap in health processes or in the justice system, you know, perhaps that accountability is not forced, but if you can add clarity and really tangible recommendations, then the accountability to solve those things sort of writes itself. It's not a forced function. It would be only logical to do this. And you know, examples in Edmonton are, you know, about health services. You know, we've worked with them in various capacities, but only in the last few years have they dedicated resources within our supported living facilities. Very recently, the major inner city hospital in Edmonton has allocated funding for a direct housing worker. Now, that housing worker has no connection to the homeless serving sector, but it's incumbent on us to make that, or to build those bridges so that person can link properly with coordinated access. And it's a major step. Like, we're really excited that other players are coming, and that happens based on need, and also if you show people that, hey, this will make a difference, you know, like optimistically, I have to think like whether you mandate it federally or not, people are going to contribute.
On that note, I'd like to thank our presenters once again for their presentations. Thank you.